Zenobia Patterson stood at the mercantile counter while Mrs. Henderson pretended not to see her raised hand signaling for service. And that simple act of being ignored told her everything she needed to know about her place in Hill City, South Dakota, in the summer of 1883. At 6 feet and 2 inches tall, Zenobia towered over every woman in town and most of the men too, a fact that had marked her as different since the day her family's wagon rolled into Hill City 5 years ago, when she was only 17. Her father had come seeking opportunity in the Black Hills, hoping to establish a lumber business now that the gold rush had settled into something more permanent. He found moderate success before a logging accident took his life 3 years past, leaving Zenobia and her mother to manage alone in a town that had never quite accepted them. "Mrs. Henderson," Zenobia said again, her voice steady despite the familiar sting of dismissal. "I have the list my mother prepared. We need flour, sugar, and coffee." The older woman finally acknowledged her with a pinched expression. "I will get to you when I am ready, Miss Patterson. There are other customers who have been waiting." Zenobia glanced around the empty store, the lie hanging between them like smoke. She had learned not to argue, not to make herself more of a spectacle than her height already did. Instead, she placed the list on the counter with the exact payment and walked out, knowing Mrs. Henderson would fill the order eventually if only to keep the business, though she would complain about it to everyone who would listen. The afternoon sun blazed down on Hill Street as Zenobia made her way past the various storefronts that comprised the heart of their small community. Hill City had grown considerably since the discovery of gold in nearby territories, though it remained modest by most standards, with perhaps 300 permanent residents. The town sat nestled in the Black Hills, surrounded by ponderosa pines and the kind of rugged beauty that should have made Zenobia feel free. Instead, she felt trapped by the whispers that followed her everywhere. "That Patterson girl," she heard someone mutter as she passed. "Unnatural, that is what it is. A woman that tall," her poor mother, another voice chimed in. "Who will ever marry her? She looks a man straight in the eye. What man wants that?" Zenobia kept her shoulders straight and her head high, a posture her mother had drilled into her despite the unwanted attention it brought. "You cannot make yourself smaller to please others," Mama had said. "God made you as you are, and that is perfect." But perfect did not find you a husband in a town where women were expected to be delicate, diminutive things who gazed adoringly upward at their menfolk. Perfect did not get you invited to social gatherings, or included in the quilting circles where other young women gathered to gossip and plan futures that seemed forever out of Zenobia's reach. She reached the small house she shared with her mother on the eastern edge of town, a modest structure her father had built with his own hands. The vegetable garden her mother tended flourished in the front yard, a testament to her determination to make a life here despite everything. "Zenobia, is that you?" her mother called from inside. "Yes, Mama." Zenobia entered to find her mother seated at the kitchen table, her sewing spread before her. Margaret Patterson had been a beauty in her youth, small and blonde and everything a proper woman should be according to society's narrow standards. She had never understood why the town punished her daughter for being different, but she felt the pain of it acutely. "Did Mrs. Henderson give you trouble again?" "Nothing I could not handle." Zenobia hung her bonnet on the peg by the door and began preparing tea. "She will send the order by this evening, I expect." Her mother's hand stilled on her needlework. "This is no way to live, darling. Perhaps we should consider moving to one of the larger cities, Denver or San Francisco, somewhere you might find people with more open minds." They had discussed this before, but the truth was they lacked the funds for such a move. Her father's lumber business had provided adequately, but not extravagantly, and since his death, they had been living off the small savings he left behind plus what Zenobia could earn doing laundry and mending for the few families willing to employ her. "We will manage, Mama. We always do." But that night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the wind move through the pines, Zenobia allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loneliness. She was 22 years old and had never been courted, never been kissed, never felt a man's arms around her except her father's before he died. The future stretched before her like an empty road leading nowhere, and she could not see how anything might change. The next morning brought unexpected news that rippled through Hill City like wildfire. A cattle drive was approaching, over 200 head being moved north from Texas to the railhead in Rapid City. The cowboys would stop in Hill City to rest and resupply, bringing with them the kind of rough excitement that the town both feared and craved. Zenobia heard about it at the general store, where she had gone to collect the supplies Mrs. Henderson had finally deigned to prepare. The woman was in high spirits, animated by the prospect of increased business and the entertainment that cowhands always provided. "You best stay home while they are here," Mrs. Henderson said to Zenobia with false concern. "Those cowboys can be rough sorts, and a girl like you might attract the wrong kind of attention." The implication was clear. Zenobia was too strange, too tall, too different to be seen as a proper lady worth respecting. She bit back a sharp retort and carried her packages home in silence. But she did not stay home. That evening, drawn by a restlessness she could not name, Zenobia walked to the edge of town where the cowboys had made camp in a large meadow. She kept her distance, watching from the shelter of the tree line as they moved about their business, tending horses and cooking over open fires. There was a freedom in how they moved, an ease in their bodies that spoke of men comfortable in their own skin. She envied that. Most of the cowboys were exactly as Mrs. Henderson had described. Rough, loud, their faces weathered by sun and wind. But one man stood apart from the others, not in physical distance but in demeanor. He was tall, she noticed immediately, perhaps 6 feet and 4 inches, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and a lean, rangy build that spoke of years in the saddle. He moved with quiet confidence as he checked the legs of a paint horse, his hands gentle and sure. As if sensing her observation, he looked up suddenly, his gaze finding hers across the distance. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, and Zenobia felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening in a room she had not known existed. Then someone called his name. "Quinn, you coming to town with us?" The tall cowboy looked away, breaking the connection, and replied in a voice deep and measured. "I will stay with the herd tonight. You boys go on." His companions laughed and joked as they headed toward town. But Quinn remained behind, and after a moment's hesitation, so did Zenobia, watching him from the shadows as the evening deepened into night. The next day, Zenobia could not stop thinking about the tall cowboy with the quiet manner. She went about her chores mechanically, washing clothes in the big copper tub behind the house, while her mind wandered to the way he had looked at her, without the usual shock or disdain she had grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes. "You are distracted today," her mother observed, hanging wet linens on the line. "I saw the cattle drive camp last night," Zenobia admitted. "There was a man there. He was very tall." Her mother's hands paused. "Tall, taller than me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. In 5 years in Hill City, Zenobia had never met a man who stood taller than herself. Even her own father had been shorter by an inch, though he had never made her feel anything but loved because of it. "Perhaps you should go into town today," her mother said carefully. The Cowboys will surely be at the saloon or the mercantile. You might see him again." Zenobia knew what her mother was really saying. You might have a chance. Just this once, you might have a chance. So she changed into her best dress, a simple blue calico that her mother had made with careful stitches, and braided her dark brown hair into a crown around her head. She could not make herself shorter, but she could be clean and presentable. That would have to be enough. Hill City's Main Street bustled with unusual activity. The Cowboys had indeed come to town, their horses tied to every available post, while the men themselves patronized the various establishments. Zenobia walked slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, searching for one particular face among the crowd. She found him outside the blacksmith shop, watching as the smith reshod one of the horses from the drive. He stood with his weight on one leg, his hat pushed back on his head, and in the full light of day, she could see that he was perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features tanned dark by the sun and eyes the color of sage in summer. Zenobia meant to walk past, to simply observe him and carry the image away like a treasure to examine later in private. But as she drew level with him, he turned his head and looked directly at her, and once again she felt that strange sensation of recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment her entire life. "Morning, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice sent warmth through her entire body. "Good morning," she managed to reply, her own voice barely above a whisper. They stood there on the wooden sidewalk with people passing around them, neither one moving, neither one looking away. Up close, she could see the details she had missed from a distance. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the callous strength of his hands, the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders. "I am Quinn Morgan," he said finally, as if the words had been pulled from him. "I am with the cattle drive passing through." "Zenobia Patterson," she replied. "I live here in Hill City." "Zenobia," he repeated, as if testing the weight of her name on his tongue. "That is a beautiful name. Different." She waited for the usual comments about how different she was, how unusual, how strange. Instead, Quinn simply smiled, a slow curve of his mouth that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "I saw you last night," he said, "at the edge of the meadow watching the camp." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I apologize, I did not mean to spy." "You were not spying. You were curious." He shifted his weight, bringing him a half step closer. "I am glad you came to town today. I was hoping I might see you again." Before Zenobia could respond, before she could process the astonishing reality that this man seemed genuinely pleased to see her, a harsh voice cut through the moment like a knife. Well, someone found a man tall enough for the Patterson giant. Zenobia turned to see Samuel Whitmore, the banker's son, standing with two of his friends. All three men wore expressions of malicious amusement. Samuel had courted several of the young women in town and fancied himself quite the ladies' man, though his attentions had never turned towards Zenobia except in mockery. "That is no way to speak to a lady," Quinn said quietly, and something in his tone made all three men take a step back. "Lady." Samuel laughed, though it sounded forced. "That is no lady, that is a circus freak, 6 feet tall if she is an inch. Her poor mother must be so ashamed." Zenobia felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her throat, but before she could turn and flee as she usually did, Quinn moved to stand beside her. Not in front of her as if she needed protection, but beside her, a united front. "I see a beautiful woman," Quinn said, his voice carrying clearly down the street. "Graceful and strong and exactly as she should be. If you cannot see that, then you are the one with a deficiency, not her." The words struck Zenobia with the force of a physical blow. Not because they hurt, but because no one had ever defended her like this, had ever called her beautiful, had ever suggested that she was exactly as she should be. Samuel sputtered, his face reddening. "Now see here. No, you see here." Quinn took a step forward, and despite the fact that Samuel was not a small man, he looked suddenly diminished before the cowboy's quiet authority. "Miss Patterson is a lady, and you will treat her with respect, or you will answer to me. Do I make myself clear?" After a tense moment, Samuel and his friends retreated, muttering amongst themselves. Quinn watched them go, then turned back to Zenobia with concern written across his features. "Are you all right? I apologize if I overstepped, but I could not let him speak to you that way." Zenobia stared at him, words failing her entirely. Her hands trembled and she clasped them together to still the shaking. "Why?" she finally managed. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." Quinn's expression softened. "I know enough. I know that you stood alone in the trees last night, watching life happen from a distance because that is what you have learned to do. I know that look in your eyes because I have felt it myself. And I know that when I saw you, I thought to myself, now there is a woman who could look me in the eye." Finally, the last word was barely audible, but Zenobia heard it clearly, and she understood suddenly that this man knew loneliness too, knew what it meant to be set apart by something beyond his control. "You are very tall," she said, and then felt foolish for stating something so obvious. But Quinn just laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something inside Zenobia's chest expand with hope. "All my life, 6 feet and 4 inches, and growing up in Texas where most men are closer to 5.5 feet, I stood out like a sore thumb. The other boys used to call me Stretch, and not in a kind way. They called me the Patterson Giant," Zenobia confessed. "Some still do, though usually behind my back now. Then they are fools." Quinn gestured down the street. "Would you walk with me, Miss Patterson? I have an hour or so before I need to return to the herd, and I would very much like to spend it in your company." Zenobia knew that walking down Main Street with this stranger would provoke endless gossip, would give the townspeople even more to whisper about. But she found she did not care. For the first time in her life, she was standing next to a man who made her feel not too tall but just right, and she was not about to give that up for the comfort of small-minded people. "I would like that very much, Mr. Morgan. Please call me Quinn. Then you must call me Zenobia." They walked slowly down the street, past the curious stares and poorly concealed whispers. Quinn asked her about Hill City, about how she had come to live here, and she found herself telling him things she had never spoken aloud to anyone except her mother. She told him about her father's death, about the loneliness of being different, about the small cruelties that had worn her down like water on stone. In turn, Quinn told her about his life on the trail, about growing up the youngest of 5 brothers in a family of ranchers outside of San Antonio. He spoke of the freedom of the open range, the satisfaction of honest work, the camaraderie of the other cowboys who had become like family to him. "But it is a lonely life too," he admitted as they reached the end of town and stood looking out at the pine-covered hills beyond. "Always moving, never settling, no place to call home, no one to share it with." "Is that what you want?" Zenobia asked. "A home, someone to share it with." Quinn turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I did not think so. I thought I was content with the life I had chosen. But then I looked up and saw you standing in the trees, and something changed. Like I had been walking in one direction my whole life and suddenly realized I could turn and walk another way entirely." They stood close enough that Zenobia could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, could smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. Her heart beat so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "The drive is leaving tomorrow," Quinn said quietly. We are only passing through. But I find I do not want to leave without knowing if I will see you again." "I am not going anywhere," Zenobia replied. "I will be right here in Hill City. Then I will come back." The words were a promise, spoken with such conviction that Zenobia felt tears prick her eyes. "I will finish this drive to Rapid City, collect my pay, and I will come back, if you would like me to." "I would like that very much." Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, his fingers long and strong as they wrapped around hers. It was the first time a man had ever held her hand with romantic intent, and Zenobia felt the simple gesture all the way to her soul. "You are perfect," Quinn said softly. "Perfect height for me. Perfect in every way." The words she had waited her entire life to hear, spoken by a man she had known for less than an hour, and somehow Zenobia knew with absolute certainty that he meant every syllable. They stood there in the afternoon sunshine, hands clasped, eyes locked, while the world carried on around them, and Zenobia felt something fundamental shift inside her. She was no longer alone. She was no longer too much or too different. She was exactly right for someone, and that made all the difference. Quinn walked her home as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. They talked the entire way, words flowing easily between them as if they had known each other for years rather than hours. He told her about the longhorns they were driving, about the challenges of keeping several hundred cattle moving in the right direction across difficult terrain. She told him about her mother's garden, about the books she loved to read, about her secret dream of seeing the ocean someday. "I have never seen it either," Quinn admitted. "But perhaps we could see it together, after I come back." The casual way he included her in his future made Zenobia's heart soar. When they reached her small house, her mother was in the garden, and she looked up in surprise at the sight of her daughter accompanied by a tall cowboy. "Mama, this is Quinn Morgan." "Quinn, my mother, Margaret Patterson." Quinn removed his hat immediately and offered a respectful nod. "Mrs. Patterson, it is a pleasure to meet you." Margaret studied him with the keen eye of a mother who had watched her daughter suffer too many disappointments. But whatever she saw in Quinn's face must have satisfied her because she smiled, a genuine expression of warmth. "Mr. Morgan, will you stay for supper? It is nothing fancy, but we have plenty." Quinn glanced at Zenobia, a question in his eyes. She gave a small nod, not trusting herself to speak, and he turned back to her mother. "I would be honored, madam. Thank you." The meal was simple but filling. Venison stew with vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and berry pie for dessert. Quinn ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting Margaret's cooking sincerely. He had the kind of manners that spoke of good upbringing, despite the rough nature of his work. As they ate, Margaret asked him about his family, his plans, his life. Zenobia knew her mother was assessing him as a potential suitor, something she had never had cause to do before. The realization made Zenobia feel both hopeful and terrified. "My parents are both living," Quinn said in response to Margaret's gentle questioning. "They have a ranch outside San Antonio, about 3,000 acres. My 4 older brothers all work the ranch with my father. I am the youngest, and there was not enough work for all of us, so I took to the trail." "But you might return to Texas someday," Margaret pressed. "I might, or I might settle somewhere else." Quinn's gaze moved to Zenobia. "It would depend on where I found reason to stay." The implication was clear, and Margaret's expression softened. "I see." After supper, Quinn helped clear the dishes despite Margaret's protests that he was a guest. Zenobia walked him out to the porch as dusk settled over the hills, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. "Thank you for today," Zenobia said. "For everything you said, everything you did. I will not forget it." I meant every word. Quinn took both her hands in his, and the gesture felt natural now, right? I will finish this drive as quickly as possible and return. It should not take more than a week, maybe 2 at most to reach Rapid City, turn the cattle over and ride back. I will wait, Zenobia promised. Quinn lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Zenobia feel like the heroine of one of the romance novels she sometimes borrowed from the small lending library in town. Until I see you again, Zenobia Patterson. Until then, Quinn Morgan. She watched him walk back toward the meadow where the cattle drive camped, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness. When she finally turned to go inside, she found her mother waiting with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Mama," Zenobia whispered, and then she was in her mother's arms crying for the first time in years, but these were tears of hope rather than pain. "He is a good man," Margaret said, stroking her daughter's hair as she had when Zenobia was small. "I can see it in him. And the way he looks at you, darling, like you are the answer to a question he has been asking his whole life. What if he does not come back?" The fear spoke itself before Zenobia could stop it. "What if he changes his mind or forgets about me or meets someone else? He will come back." Margaret spoke with the certainty of a mother who knew things beyond reason. "That man is coming back for you, Zenobia. I would stake my life on it." The cattle drive pulled out before dawn the next morning, the sound of hundreds of hooves and the calls of the cowboys carrying clearly through the quiet town. Zenobia stood at her bedroom window and watched them go, searching for one tall figure among the rest. She found him riding near the rear of the herd, and as if he knew exactly where she would be, Quinn looked back toward her house and raised his hand in farewell. She pressed her palm against the glass in response, a silent promise passing between them across the distance. The days that followed were strange. The town returned to its normal rhythms, but everything felt different to Zenobia. The whispers and stares that had always hurt her feelings now seemed insignificant, powerless to touch the warm certainty that Quinn had planted in her heart. She moved through her chores with a lightness she had never felt before, humming songs she had not even realized she knew. "You are different," Mrs. Henderson observed when Zenobia came to purchase supplies 3 days after Quinn left. The older woman's tone held suspicion, as if happiness in Zenobia was somehow threatening. "I suppose I am," Zenobia replied with a smile. "It is because of that cowboy, is it not? The tall one who made such a scene on Main Street." Mrs. Henderson sniffed disapprovingly. "Mark my words, girl, those drifters are not to be trusted. He will not come back." But Zenobia just kept smiling because she knew something Mrs. Henderson did not. Quinn Morgan was a man who kept his promises. She counted the days like a miser counting coins. 1 week passed, then another. Her mother tried to hide her own growing worry, but Zenobia could see it in the way Margaret watched her daughter, could hear it in her increasingly forced cheerfulness. "Perhaps the drive took longer than expected," Margaret suggested when the 3rd week arrived. "Or the business in Rapid City required more time." "Perhaps," Zenobia agreed, but doubt had begun to creep in, cold and insidious. What if Mrs. Henderson was right? What if Quinn had been caught up in the romance of a single afternoon but forgot about her once he returned to his real life? What if she had been foolish to trust so quickly, to hope so completely? On the 18th day, Zenobia was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She looked up, her hands still buried in the soil, and there he was, Quinn Morgan, riding a beautiful chestnut mare, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw her. Zenobia stood slowly, barely believing her eyes. Quinn dismounted and covered the distance between them in long strides, and then somehow she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, his heart beating strong and steady beneath her ear. "I am sorry it took so long," he said into her hair. "There were complications with the sale, and then I had business to attend to. But I came back, just as I promised. I came back for you." Zenobia pulled away just enough to look up at him, and the expression on his face stole her breath. This man was looking at her with something very much like love, and they had only known each other for a single afternoon. "I was beginning to think I dreamed you," she admitted. "I am real." To prove it, Quinn cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "As real as you are, as real as what I feel for you." "Quinn," she whispered, and then he was kissing her. Zenobia had never been kissed before, but somehow her body knew exactly what to do. She rose up on her toes, even though she barely needed to given their matched heights, and kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing and newfound hope that filled her heart. His lips were warm and firm, and the kiss was simultaneously gentle and passionate, a perfect contradiction that made her entire body come alive with sensation. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is too soon, and I know I should wait and court you properly, but I do not want to lie or hide what I feel. I love you, Zenobia Patterson. I love you too." The words came easily because they were absolutely true. Zenobia had fallen in love with Quinn Morgan the moment he stood beside her on Main Street and defended her, the moment he called her perfect, the moment he promised to come back. "I love you, and I do not care if it is too soon or improper or anything else." They stood there in her mother's vegetable garden, holding each other while the summer sun blazed overhead, and Zenobia felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. She had spent her entire life feeling like a piece that did not fit any puzzle, but with Quinn, she fit perfectly. Margaret came out of the house, drawn by the sound of voices, and her face lit up when she saw Quinn. "Mr. Morgan, you came back." "I gave my word, madam." Quinn released Zenobia but kept hold of her hand as if he could not bear to let her go completely. "And I have a question to ask you, if I might." Margaret's eyes widened. "Of course." Quinn took a deep breath, and Zenobia realized with shock that he was nervous. This tall, confident man who had faced down Samuel Whitmore and his friends without hesitation was nervous to speak to her mother. "Mrs. Patterson, I would like permission to court your daughter properly. I know we have only just met, and I know I do not have much to offer right now. But I am a hard worker, and I have saved most of my wages from the past 5 years. I can provide for her, keep her safe and happy. If you will allow it, I would very much like the chance to prove myself worthy of Zenobia." Tears streamed down Margaret's face, but she was smiling. "Mr. Morgan, you are already worthy. Any man who sees my daughter for who she truly is, who values her and treats her with respect, is worthy. You have my permission and my blessing." Quinn's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, madam. You will not regret it, I promise." "I know I will not." Margaret wiped her eyes. "Now you must stay for supper again, and this time you must tell us your plans. Where will you and Zenobia live? What will you do for work?" It was presumptuous to assume marriage when Quinn had only asked to court her daughter, but Margaret clearly saw what Zenobia felt in her own heart. This was not a casual courtship, but the beginning of something permanent. They went inside, and over coffee and cake, Quinn explained what he had done during the past 3 weeks. He had not only sold the cattle, but had also met with several businessmen in Rapid City who were looking for experienced men to help establish new ranches in the area. "There is a position available near here," Quinn said, his eyes on Zenobia. managing a small ranch about 10 miles north of Hill City. The owner is an older gentleman who needs someone to handle the day-to-day operations. It includes a house, a good salary, and the potential to buy the property eventually if things work out. I accepted it, contingent on certain personal matters resolving favorably. You did that for me. Zenobia could hardly believe it. You arranged your entire future around staying near me. I arranged my future around you, Quinn corrected gently. Not near you, with you, if you want that too. I do, Zenobia said without hesitation. More than anything. The next few weeks were the happiest of Zenobia's life. Quinn stayed in town, taking a room at the boarding house while he prepared for his new position. He called on Zenobia every day, always proper, always respectful of her reputation and her mother's presence. But the love between them grew with each passing hour, until the air itself seemed to shimmer with it whenever they were together. Quinn took her on picnics in the hills, where they lay in the tall grass and talked for hours about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride his horse, his arms around her waist, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. They walked through town together, and though people still stared and whispered, Zenobia found she no longer cared. Let them talk. She had Quinn, and that was worth any amount of gossip. Samuel Whitmore and his friends made themselves scarce whenever Quinn was around, but Zenobia heard through town gossip that Samuel had complained bitterly about the upstart drifter who thought he was better than respectable folk. The words bounced off Zenobia like rain off oiled canvas. She was too happy to be touched by such petness. One evening, about a month after Quinn's return, he took Zenobia up into the hills to a spot overlooking Hill City. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath in the beauty of the moment. I have something to ask you, Quinn said, and when Zenobia turned to look at him, she found him on one knee, a small velvet box in his hand. Her heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Zenobia Patterson, I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of my feelings for you. You are my perfect match in every way that matters. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how extraordinary you are. Will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the sunset and threw rainbow light across her skin. It was not extravagant, but it was honest and real, just like Quinn himself. Yes, Zenobia said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Quinn Morgan. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Quinn laughed and stood, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. I was thinking about asking your mother to help plan a wedding for this autumn, Quinn said. October, maybe, when the leaves are changing and the weather is still fine. Would that suit you? That would be perfect. They returned to town as twilight fell, and Zenobia's hand felt heavy with the unfamiliar weight of the ring. Margaret cried when they told her the news, happy tears that she did not even try to hide. She pulled Quinn into a fierce hug, this man who had become like a son to her in just a few short weeks. I need to write to my family, Quinn said later that evening. Tell them about you, invite them to the wedding if they can make the journey. Will they come? Zenobia asked, suddenly nervous at the thought of meeting his parents, his 4 brothers and their families. They will move heaven and earth to come, Quinn assured her. My mother has been despairing of me ever finding a wife. She always said I needed to find a woman who could stand eye to eye with me in more ways than one. She is going to love you. The months before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Margaret threw herself into preparations with the enthusiasm of a woman who had never dared to hope she would plan her daughter's wedding. She sewed a beautiful dress of cream silk, simple but elegant, that made Zenobia look like a fairy tale princess despite her unusual height. Quinn started his new position at the ranch and proved himself invaluable within weeks. His employer, a widower named Mr. Thompson, treated him almost like a son, and the two men formed a genuine friendship. The house that came with the position was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a porch that looked out over rolling grassland. Quinn spent his spare time fixing it up, painting and repairing in preparation for bringing home his bride. To Zenobia's surprise, some of the townspeople began to soften toward her as news of her engagement spread. Perhaps it was the undeniable devotion Quinn showed her, or perhaps it was simply that being chosen made her more acceptable in their eyes. Either way, women who had previously ignored her began offering congratulations, and Mrs. Henderson actually smiled when Zenobia came into the mercantile to order supplies for her new household. "I suppose I should apologize," Mrs. Henderson said stiffly one afternoon. "I may have been too quick to judge you, Miss Patterson. Your young man is clearly quite respectable, and you seem very happy." It was not much of an apology, but Zenobia accepted it graciously. She had no energy to spare for old grudges, not when her future stretched before her bright and full of promise. Quinn's family arrived a week before the wedding. His parents, Robert and Catherine Morgan, along with 3 of his 4 brothers and their wives and children. The 4th brother had to stay behind to mind the ranch in Texas, but he sent his congratulations and a generous gift. Catherine Morgan was a tall woman herself, though not quite as tall as Zenobia, with Quinn's same green eyes and an air of quiet strength. When she first saw Zenobia, she clasped the younger woman's hands and said, "Oh, my dear, you are perfect for him. Just perfect." Robert Morgan was shorter than his wife and all his sons, but he possessed the kind of confidence that had nothing to do with physical stature. He shook Zenobia's hand firmly and said, "Welcome to the family, daughter. We are glad to have you." The brothers were all variations on Quinn's theme, tall, dark-haired, with the same easy manner and genuine warmth. Their wives welcomed Zenobia immediately, drawing her into their circle as if she had always belonged there. The children, ranging in age from infants to teenagers, ran wild through Hill City with the other local kids, creating cheerful chaos wherever they went. For the first time in her life, Zenobia felt what it was like to be part of a large, loving family. The Morgans were loud and boisterous, always laughing and teasing each other, but beneath the noise was a bedrock of deep affection and loyalty. They treated her like one of their own from the first moment, and by the end of that first day, Zenobia loved them almost as much as she loved Quinn. The wedding took place on a brilliant October afternoon with the aspens turning gold on the hillsides and the air crisp with the promise of winter. The small church in Hill City was packed with people, not just locals but also cowboys and ranch hands who had worked with Quinn over the years, all come to celebrate with the man they respected. Zenobia wore her mother's cream silk dress and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Quinn had picked for her that morning. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Thompson, who had volunteered to give her away in her father's absence, she had eyes only for Quinn. He stood at the altar in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes shining with emotion. When she reached him and he took her hand, she felt the rightness of the moment settle over her like a blessing. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Quinn said, "I do," in his deep, steady voice, Zenobia felt the promise of it echo through her entire body. And when she said the same words back to him, she meant them with every fiber of her being. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, and Quinn gathered Zenobia into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. The reception was held in the meadow where Zenobia had first seen Quinn, now transformed with tables and lanterns, and enough food to feed half the territory. The Morgans had contributed generously to the feast, and Margaret had baked for days in preparation. There was music and dancing, and Quinn led Zenobia in a waltz while everyone watched, the tall couple moving together with natural grace. "Happy," Quinn murmured as they swayed together under the twilight sky. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Zenobia replied, and it was nothing but the truth. They spent their wedding night in the little house that was now theirs, and Zenobia discovered that physical love between husband and wife was everything the whispered rumors among married women had promised, and more. Quinn was gentle and patient, making sure her first time was filled with pleasure rather than pain. And when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Zenobia felt complete in a way that transcended the physical. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I love you more than words can express," Quinn replied, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "You are everything I never knew I needed, Zenobia Morgan." The sound of her new name made her smile. She was no longer Zenobia Patterson, the too tall girl nobody wanted. She was Zenobia Morgan, beloved wife, and the difference was everything. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. Quinn worked the ranch with skill and dedication, and his employer's trust in him grew with each passing week. Zenobia made their little house into a true home, cooking and cleaning and sewing curtains, and all the small tasks that marked a domestic life. But she also helped Quinn with the ranch work whenever he needed an extra set of hands, and he never once suggested that she was not capable or that such work was unladylike. Margaret often visited, delighted to see her daughter so happy. She and Catherine Morgan had formed their own friendship, writing long letters back and forth between Hill City and Texas. In the spring, Margaret announced that she was selling the old house and moving to San Antonio to be near Catherine, and Zenobia was thrilled that her mother would no longer be alone. The first year of marriage flew by in a haze of happiness. Quinn proved to be everything a husband should be: loving, faithful, hardworking, and endlessly patient with Zenobia's occasional insecurities when the old voices in her head tried to tell her she was not enough. On those days, he would take her in his arms and remind her of her worth until the doubts faded away. One morning in late spring, Zenobia woke feeling nauseated and immediately understood what it meant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain, and then one evening she told Quinn that they were going to have a child. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that he would make her dizzy, laughing with pure joy. Then he set her down carefully and placed his hand on her still flat stomach with an expression of wonder. "A baby," he said softly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Zenobia asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Quinn kissed her gently. "You have given me everything, Zenobia. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Zenobia felt healthy and strong, and she continued to help Quinn with lighter ranch chores even as her belly swelled. Some of the other ranch wives clucked their tongues at such behavior, but Quinn supported whatever made Zenobia comfortable, and that was all that mattered. In December, On a cold night when snow blanketed the hills, Zenobia went into labor. The local midwife attended her, along with two neighbor women who had finally come around to accepting Zenobia. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zenobia feared something had gone wrong. But Quinn was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement even though she could see the worry in his eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby arrived. A boy, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. He was long, the midwife noted with amusement, probably going to be tall like his parents. "What should we name him?" Quinn asked, cradling his son with the careful reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious. "I was thinking Thomas," Zenobia said softly, "after my father." "Thomas Morgan." Quinn tested the name and smiled. "It is perfect. He is perfect, just like his mother." The next few months were exhausting as they adjusted to life with an infant, but they were also filled with a joy so profound that Zenobia sometimes felt her heart might burst from it. Little Thomas was an easy baby, quick to smile and rarely fussy, and he thrived under the devoted attention of both parents. When Thomas was 6 months old, Mr. Thompson called Quinn into his study for a private conversation. Quinn returned home that evening with a stunned expression and news that would change everything. "He is selling me the ranch," Quinn said, his voice hushed with disbelief. "Mr. Thompson is retiring to live with his daughter in Denver, and he wants to sell the property to me. He is offering me terms I can afford, payments over time. Zenobia, we could own this place, really own it." It was an opportunity beyond their wildest dreams. The ranch was not huge, but it was productive and well-maintained, with good grazing land and a reliable water source. With careful management, it could provide a comfortable living for their growing family. "Then we should accept," Zenobia said immediately. "You have worked so hard for this, Quinn. You deserve it." They finalized the agreement in the spring of 1886, and the ranch officially became theirs. Quinn had the deed framed and hung in their parlor, and sometimes Zenobia would catch him just staring at it, as if he could not quite believe their good fortune. The years that followed were full of the ordinary challenges and triumphs of ranch life. They added to the house, building 2 more bedrooms in anticipation of expanding their family. Zenobia gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Quinn's mother, and then another son they called James. Each child was healthy and happy, and the house rang with laughter and noise. Thomas grew tall, just as predicted, shooting up so fast that his pants were always too short. Catherine inherited her mother's height and her father's confidence, and she seemed utterly unbothered by being taller than every other girl her age. James was still small, but he showed signs of following his brother and sister in the height department. The ranch prospered under Quinn's management. He was a natural cattleman, with an instinct for breeding and land management that led to steady growth year after year. Zenobia proved equally capable, managing the household and the ranch finances with skill. They made a formidable team, and their success gradually earned them respect even from those in Hill City who had once scorned Zenobia. Samuel Whitmore eventually married a small, blonde woman who seemed to disappear next to him. Zenobia saw them occasionally in town and always made a point of greeting them politely. She bore Samuel no ill will. If anything, she felt sorry for him. His life seemed small and constrained, defined by the narrow expectations of society, while hers had expanded beyond anything she once thought possible. Mrs. Henderson grew old and eventually turned her store over to her son, who was far more pleasant. On her deathbed, she sent word that she wanted to speak with Zenobia. When Zenobia came to her bedside, the old woman took her hand with surprising strength. "I was wrong about you," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thin but clear. "I judged you harshly for something that was not your fault, and I am sorry. You have made a good life, Miss Patterson. Mrs. Morgan, I should say. Better than most of us." Zenobia forgave her, because holding on to anger would only poison her own happiness. The past was past, and she had too much to be grateful for to dwell on old hurts. Margaret lived to see all 3 of her grandchildren, spending her final years in San Antonio with Quinn Morgan, and passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. Zenobia grieved deeply for her mother, but she took comfort in knowing that Margaret had been happy at the end, surrounded by friends and family who loved her. Quinn's parents also passed within a few years of each other, leaving the Texas ranch to Quinn's oldest brother as had always been planned. But the brothers remained close despite the distance, visiting whenever possible and maintaining a bond that their children inherited. As Thomas grew into a young man, he proved to have his father's way with horses and cattle. At 20, he announced his intention to start his own ranch on land adjacent to theirs, and Quinn helped him with both finances and expertise. Catherine, spirited and independent, declared she had no interest in ranching and instead became a teacher, beloved by the children of Hill City for her patient instruction and genuine care. James, the baby, ended up being the tallest of them all at 6 feet and 5 inches, and he took over the management of the family ranch when Quinn and Zenobia were ready to step back from the daily operations. The years passed, as years do, marked by the ordinary rhythms of life: births and deaths, good harvests and lean years, moments of joy and periods of sorrow. Through it all, Quinn and Zenobia remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with time rather than fading. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Zenobia back to the meadow where they had first spoken, where they had held their wedding reception, where so much of their story had unfolded. They stood together watching the sunset, and Zenobia marveled at how different her life had turned out from what she once imagined. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not seen you that night?" Quinn asked, his arm around her waist. "If I had gone into town with the other men instead of staying with the herd?" "I try not to," Zenobia admitted. "It frightens me, the thought of how easily we might have missed each other." "We would not have," Quinn said with certainty. "I believe some things are meant to be." "You and I were meant to be, Zenobia. From the moment I was born too tall for the world around me, I was meant to grow until I found the one woman who would fit perfectly beside me. You." Zenobia turned in his arms to face him fully, her hands on his chest, her eyes searching his beloved face. Time had added silver to his dark hair and lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "You saved me," she said softly. "I was drowning in that town in my own loneliness, and you pulled me out. You showed me I was not too much, not too different. Just right for someone, for you." "We saved each other," Quinn corrected, then kissed her with the practiced ease of 25 years of marriage. "And I would do it again in a heartbeat. Every single choice, every single moment, it all led me to you." They stayed there as the stars came out, 2 tall figures silhouetted against the darkening sky, still as in love as they had been at the beginning. Around them, the land they had built a life on stretched in all directions, testament to their hard work and dedication. Behind them, the house they had raised 3 children in glowed with welcoming light. Before them, the rest of their lives beckoned with the promise of more shared days, more quiet moments, more love. As they walked home hand in hand, Zenobia thought about the girl she had been. Lonely, rejected, convinced she would never fit anywhere. That girl would scarcely believe the life she had built, the family she had created, the love she had found. but every step of the journey had been worth it because it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life. Quinn seemed to sense the direction of her thoughts because he squeezed her hand gently. "What are you thinking about? How grateful I am," Zenobia replied honestly. "For everything. For you, most of all. The feeling is entirely mutual, my love." They reached their porch and paused before going inside, looking back one more time at the land spread before them in the moonlight. This place had become their kingdom, their sanctuary, their home. Here they were not too tall or too different or too anything. Here they were simply Quinn and Zenobia Morgan, partners in every sense of the word, perfectly matched in height and heart. "Ready to go in?" Quinn asked. Zenobia smiled up at him, this man who had changed everything with a few simple words all those years ago. "Ready." They went inside together, closing the door on the night, and the warm glow of their home surrounded them like an embrace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, as every day did. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that fateful day in 1883 when a tall cowboy looked at a tall woman and saw not something wrong, but something absolutely right. Years continued to unfold with gentle grace. Zenobia and Quinn grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren who inherited their height and their capacity for love. The little house expanded over time to accommodate family gatherings, additions built with care and consideration, until it sprawled comfortably across its foundation like a well-loved cat in sunshine. Thomas married at 25, choosing a woman named Alina who stood 5 feet 11 inches tall and who looked at his height with the same appreciation Zenobia had seen in Quinn's eyes all those years ago. They built a fine ranch on the land adjacent to Quinn and Zenobia's property, and filled it with 4 children who ran between the 2 households as if they were one. Catherine never married, declaring herself perfectly content with her teaching and her independence. She became the principal of Hill City School and was beloved by generations of students who benefited from her wisdom and compassion. She lived in a small cottage on the ranch property and took her meals with Quinn and Zenobia most evenings, the 3 of them sitting on the porch and discussing books, politics, and philosophy long into the night. James married at 23 to a rancher's daughter from Rapid City, and they had twin boys who were, as the doctor said at their birth, destined to be giants. The twins delighted Quinn, who spent his later years teaching them everything he knew about ranching, horses, and being a good man in a world that often rewarded the opposite. Hill City itself changed over the decades. The wild frontier town gradually settled into respectable civilization. The saloon became a restaurant, the rough boarding house was replaced by a proper hotel, and electric lights eventually came to Main Street. But some things remained constant. The pines covering the hills, the quality of the mountain air, the tight-knit community that had finally, eventually, accepted Zenobia as one of their own. She became known as a woman of substance in Hill City, respected for her business acumen, her fair dealing, and her quiet charity to those in need. When newcomers arrived in town and saw the tall woman walking down Main Street with her equally tall husband, they did not see anything strange or wrong. They saw a couple so perfectly matched, it seemed inevitable they would have found each other, as if the universe itself had conspired to bring them together. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out for a celebration in that same meadow where everything had begun. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by neighbors, friends, and family. Music played, children ran wild, and Quinn and Zenobia danced together as they had on their wedding day, though their steps were slower now, more careful but no less full of love. "40 years," Quinn said as they moved together. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean." Zenobia rested her head on his shoulder, comfortable in a way that came only from decades of intimacy. "I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Cannot even remember what it felt like before." "Lonely," Quinn said softly. "I remember that much. It felt lonely." They were in their 60s now, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but still strong, still healthy. Quinn's hair had gone completely white, and Zenobia's dark locks were heavily streaked with silver. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love over the course of a single afternoon, who had built a life from nothing but determination and devotion. As the party continued around them, their grandchildren brought them chairs and insisted they sit, fussing over them with the kind of bossy affection that made Quinn and Zenobia exchange amused glances. They settled into the seats and watched the celebration, hands clasped between them, a unit unto themselves even in the midst of chaos. Thomas brought his eldest son over, a boy of 15 who had just shot up to 6 feet tall and was struggling with the awkwardness of his changing body. "Grandmother, grandfather, Charlie has been having some trouble at school. Some of the boys have been making comments about his height." Zenobia looked at her grandson, seeing in his uncertain eyes the same pain she had felt at his age. Quinn seemed to recognize it too because he gestured for the boy to come closer. "Charlie, let me tell you something I learned a long time ago," Quinn said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Being different is only a problem if you let other people make it one. Your height is not a flaw or a mistake. It is part of who you are, and someday you will find people who appreciate it, who see it as the gift it is." "But everyone stares," Charlie said miserably. "And the girls all laugh." "Let them stare," Zenobia said firmly. "You know what I did when people stared at me. I looked right back at them, held my head high, and refused to be ashamed of something I could not change. And eventually, I met your grandfather, and he showed me that the right person will never make you feel too much or too different. The right person will make you feel exactly right." Quinn nodded. "You are 15 now. In a few years, you will be a man, and your height will be an advantage in ways you cannot yet imagine. But more than that, the experience of being different will teach you empathy and compassion. It will make you a better person than those boys who mock you now. Trust me on this." Charlie looked between his grandparents, these two tall, dignified people who clearly loved each other deeply, and something in his expression shifted. "Did it really get better for you, both of you?" "It got better than we ever imagined possible," Zenobia assured him. "I was your age once, feeling exactly as you do now. I thought I would always be alone, always be the strange one nobody wanted. And then I met your grandfather and everything changed. Your person is out there too, Charlie. You just have to be patient." The boy left looking comforted, and Thomas squeezed both his parents' shoulders in gratitude before following his son. Quinn and Zenobia shared a smile, the kind of wordless communication that came from decades of marriage. As evening fell and the party began to wind down, their children and grandchildren came to say goodnight, each one hugging Quinn and Zenobia and telling them how much they loved them. When everyone had finally left, and they were alone in the meadow with just the stars for company, Quinn helped Zenobia to her feet. "Shall we walk home, Mrs. Morgan?" "I would like nothing better, Mr. Morgan." They made their way slowly back to the house, their steps matched, their hands clasped. The night was clear and cool, perfect for walking, and neither was in any hurry. They had learned long ago that the journey was just as important as the destination. "You ever regret it?" Zenobia asked suddenly. "Giving up the trail, settling here. You loved that life, the freedom of it." Quinn stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. Zenobia, I have never regretted a single moment. That life was lonely, even when I was surrounded by other men. I was searching for something without even knowing what it was. And then I found you, and I realized what I had been searching for all along was home. Not a place, but a person. You are my home, and I would choose you over 1,000 trails, 1,000 adventures, every single time. Tears slipped down Zenobia's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. After 40 years, Quinn had seen her cry many times in joy and sorrow, and she had no shame in showing emotion before him. "You are my home too," she whispered, "my safe harbor in every storm." They kissed there in the moonlight, two old people still desperately in love, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter in approval. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Quinn and Zenobia passed their 50th anniversary surrounded by family, a milestone few couples reached, and one they did not take for granted. The ranch was fully in James's capable hands now, though Quinn still consulted on major decisions, and Zenobia still kept an eye on the books. They spent their days in gentle pursuits, reading, gardening, sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. They took walks when the weather permitted, visited with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who seemed to multiply by the year, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of each other's company. Quinn's health began to fail when he was 73. Nothing dramatic, just the slow decline that came with age. His joints ached, his breathing grew labored, and he moved more slowly than he once had. Zenobia, only a year younger, felt her own body betraying her in small ways, but she focused her energy on caring for Quinn, making sure he was comfortable and content. On a spring morning just after Zenobia's 72nd birthday, Quinn did not wake up. She found him peaceful in their bed, his face relaxed, no signs of pain or struggle. He had simply slipped away in the night, his great heart finally giving out after more than 7 decades of steady beating. The grief was crushing, absolute. After 50 years of marriage, Zenobia had forgotten how to be a singular person rather than half of a whole. The house felt empty despite the constant presence of concerned family members. The world seemed muted, as if someone had turned down the volume on life itself. But even in her grief, Zenobia found comfort in the memories. 50 years of love, of partnership, of building a life together. 3 children who had grown into wonderful adults. 11 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. A successful ranch that would provide for generations to come. Quinn had not just saved her from loneliness all those years ago, he had given her a legacy. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of South Dakota. Quinn had touched many lives, and people came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects. They told stories of his kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses and cattle. They spoke of how he had treated everyone with respect regardless of their station, how he had been quick to help a neighbor in need, how his word had been his bond. But the story Zenobia treasured most came from an unexpected source. Charlie, her grandson who was now a young man of 25 and happily married to a woman as tall as himself, stood up and spoke about the day at their anniversary party, when Quinn and Zenobia had given him advice about being different. "My grandfather taught me that being unusual was not a curse but a gift," Charlie said, his voice strong and clear. "He showed me through his own life that the right person would appreciate what made me different, and he was right. My wife loves me exactly as I am, height and all. I have him to thank for giving me the courage to be myself, to not hide or apologize for who I am. That is the legacy he leaves behind, not just a successful ranch or a large family, but the knowledge that we are all exactly as we should be." Zenobia wept at those words, and when the service ended, she stood before Quinn's grave for a long time, saying a private goodbye to the man who had changed everything. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable, for 50 years of happiness. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." In the months that followed, Zenobia gradually found her footing again. The grief remained, but it became bearable, woven into the fabric of her daily life rather than overwhelming it. She took comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the continuation of the life she and Quinn had built together. She lived 5 more years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, attended Charlie's daughter's wedding, and celebrated James's 50th birthday. She kept Quinn's memory alive by telling stories to the youngest generation, making sure they knew the man their great-grandfather had been. On a summer evening very much like the one when she had first seen Quinn, Zenobia sat on her porch watching the sun set over the hills. Catherine sat beside her, reading aloud from a novel they had been enjoying together. But Zenobia's mind wandered, pulled by memories and a strange feeling of anticipation. "Mama, are you all right?" Catherine asked, noticing her mother's distraction. "I am fine, darling, just thinking." Zenobia reached over and took her daughter's hand. "You have been such a blessing to me, Catherine. All my children have, but you especially. Thank you for staying close, for keeping me company." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Catherine said, squeezing her mother's hand gently. That night, Zenobia went to bed feeling content. She had lived a good life, far better than the lonely girl in Hill City could ever have imagined. She had been loved and had loved in return. She had built something lasting, something that would continue long after she was gone. In the morning, Catherine found her mother much as Zenobia had found Quinn 5 years earlier, peaceful, painless, simply gone. She had died with a slight smile on her face, as if welcoming an old friend. The funeral matched Quinn's in size and emotional weight. People spoke of Zenobia's strength, her business acumen, her devotion to family. They told of how she had overcome prejudice to become one of the most respected women in the territory. They celebrated a life well lived, a love well earned. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came when they buried her next to Quinn, under a marker that read, "Together in life, together in eternity." Because that was what their story had always been about. 2 people who found each other against the odds and built something beautiful together. The ranch continued under James's management, then passed to his twin sons, then to their children. The house where Quinn and Zenobia had raised their family remained standing for over a century, carefully maintained by descendants who understood its significance. The meadow where they had met, married, and celebrated anniversaries became a family gathering place, a spot where each generation came to remember the 2 people who had started it all. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light slanted golden across the grassland, ranch hands swore they could see 2 tall figures standing together at the edge of the meadow, hand in hand, watching over the land they had loved. Whether it was truth or legend, no one could say for certain. But the story of Quinn and Zenobia Morgan endured, passed down through the generations as a reminder that love could triumph over prejudice, that being different was not a flaw but a gift, and that somewhere in the world there was a perfect match for everyone if you were brave enough to wait for them. The town of Hill City never forgot them. A plaque was eventually placed on Main Street commemorating their contributions to the community, though the greatest monument to their love was not made of bronze or stone but of living, breathing descendants who carried their legacy forward. Children who stood tall and proud, who chose love over convention, who understood that true worth had nothing to do with conforming to others' expectations. In the end, that was the real story, not just of 2 tall people who found each other, but of two souls who recognized in each other the possibility of home. Quinn had seen Zenobia not as too tall but as perfect height for him. And in doing so, he had given her not just love, but the permission to be fully herself, something more valuable than gold or land or any material wealth. Their love story became legend, the kind of tale mothers told daughters and fathers told sons, a reminder that true love existed and that patience would be rewarded. Young people who felt different, who struggled to fit into the narrow boxes society provided, took comfort in knowing that Quinn and Zenobia had felt that way too, and look how their story had ended. The Morgan Ranch prospered for generations, a testament to the solid foundation Quinn and Zenobia had built. The values they instilled in their children and grandchildren, the importance of integrity, hard work, and treating everyone with respect, shaped not just their family but the entire community around them. Hill City grew and changed, but it never forgot the couple who had helped define what it meant to be decent, honorable people. And so, their story concluded not with an ending but with a continuation, rippling outward through time like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Quinn and Zenobia Morgan had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it. They had proved that prejudice could be overcome, that true love was worth waiting for, and that being different was not a curse but a blessing. Their legacy lived on in every tall child who held their head high, in every person who chose love over convention, in every couple who built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine affection. In the meadow where it all began, the grass still grew tall and the wildflowers still bloomed each spring. The wind still whispered through the ponderosa pines, and the stars still shone bright in the vast Montana sky. And if you listened closely on summer evenings, you might hear the echo of laughter, the soft murmur of two voices in conversation, the sound of a love story that had no ending because true love never really ends at all. It simply transforms, becoming part of the land, the air, the very fabric of a place until story and reality blur together into something timeless and true.